But when we get there and we initially have that conversation with loved ones or friends and we ask, so did you notice anything? Was there anything that stood out? 9 times out of 10, you'll have people say, no, John was fine. I mean, we just had dinner the other night and he was laughing and we were having a good time and we never saw this coming. You want to walk into a room and silence a group of first responders, just say the word suicide and they're just like, oh. We're not trying to really get to the bottom of why. Why is this happening? How is this happening? And is there anything that we can essentially do to turn this around?
Welcome to Responder Resilience and another installment of our Clinician Masterclass Series for clinicians and also for savvy first responders. And today we'll be tackling Suicide Psychological Autopsies with Elizabeth Pol, MA. She's the founder of Resilient Heroes, NFP, and currently an active Chicago police officer. We invite you to like and subscribe YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. We'll be back to speak with Liz right after this.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
with vital information and resources,
resilient strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Responder Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Rimley, LCSW, EMTB.
We want to welcome Elizabeth Pol, who's been a Chicago police officer for 20 plus years. She's also a mental health professional with a master's in forensic psychology, and she's a certified suicide psychological autopsy investigator. Liz is also the founder of Resilient Heroes, NFP. Her credentials include state certified law enforcement instructor and certified curriculum in trauma and suicide psychoeducation. And she's a team member on the Northern Illinois Critical Incident Stress Management team, and they respond to agencies for diffusions and debriefings. Liz, welcome to Responder Resilience.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So Liz, I'd like to start off by asking you, can you begin by explaining, what is a psychological autopsy? How does that differ from a regular autopsy?
So the suicide psychological autopsies are where we take a case of suicide and we're essentially going back psychologically and we're trying to kind of dissect what has occurred with the individual's behaviors, their personality, what was going on with work, personal life. And through interview of some of the closest individuals to the deceased, we're trying to piece together what essentially happened, especially in the last month or even further back. And so as I take a case, we are starting with the closest. If they have, parents, significant others, coworkers, especially because they are first responders. So we're looking at, their partners or just people from their shifts. And we're really starting to talk to some of the closest individuals to really just gather a lot about the individual's identity overall, their behaviors, and what has, kind of occurred from that day where they took their life all the way back.
I'm wondering, what are the 3 questions that suicide psychological autopsies are really trying to answer and decipher?
So we're trying to answer why suicide, why that day, and why those means. We see that with law enforcement. Typically, we're going to see in the 90 percentile range that a handgun is going to be used because of accessibility to being their duty weapon versus any other first responders. So that's what we typically see with that population.
Let's say for the families that are impacted by a suicide, what kind of insights can you give them after doing this analysis and this autopsy?
So when I gather all this information and I write out a report, it could be, it's a very detailed report, really just having people understand what it is that was present as far as risk factors, right? What was going on with the individual to try to understand how this happened. Overall, with the suicide autopsies, I find that especially early on in my career on the job. First of all, I didn't realize that suicide was such a problem amongst first responders. And as a police officer, as a young 20-something-year-old, I was blown away. And I found that majority of us officers in my department and many other departments as well, we were left with a lot of why and confusion as to how this could happen, right? How does someone get to this point versus the rest of us? And so by doing these autopsies, I'm gathering a lot of information that's very telling as far as how not only risk factors were present and maybe we've missed, protective factors go diminished, right? They've really diminished and they're not present. And so that has a lot of individuals kind of lose that sense of hope or start to have that, doomsday feeling, like what's the point? Why go on? And so it just kind of aids into moving further and further and spiraling into this direction of suicide. And so for the families, once I've completed this, and as I tell them from the very beginning when we do, when I do conduct these, we're not changing the outcome. It's very unfortunate. It's very sad. We're not here to change the outcome, but we are trying to gather some sense of understanding because there are a lot of people, especially family members and close coworkers, that are left with unanswered questions and they don't seem to really be able to grasp how this occurred. So it does give a sense of closure and a bit of understanding, if anything, psychologically, to just kind of close it off and just understand. You don't have to necessarily agree with it. Most of us don't agree with this outcome. However, we do want to have some kind of understanding. And if not for nothing, moving forward, I feel that we owe it to these individuals who struggled, who suffered, who were in so much pain, to try to avoid this from happening to the next individual by taking proactive approaches.
Right.
So I had a question for Liz. I wanted to ask you, are these psychological autopsies performed automatically, or does one have to does a department or does a family have to request that one be done?
So unfortunately, that's not something that people are really aware of. Most of the people I come across are just kind of like, wait, a what? And, they hear the word autopsy and they're thinking like a medical autopsy from a morgue. It's completely different. So a lot of agencies are still, I'm going to be honest, they're very skeptical of having these because people don't want to have blame placed on them. And I totally understand that, right? However, as we continue to really talk about breaking down what they are and why we're doing them and what the outcome is that we're looking for, people are starting to change their minds a bit and be like, okay, if we do really want to get to the root of the problem, to try to kind of just redirect what we keep seeing happening over and over again, because it is a sense of insanity that we're seeing with these suicides where, honestly, what I've seen through various agencies is, we have a suicide occur, everyone has an emotional reaction to it. You feel upset, you feel sad, you're confused. And everyone's on the same page where they feel that we need to change this. This is crazy. This has to get better. However, 5 to 7 days after we've put the individual, we laid them to rest, we're back to business as usual until suicide occurs. And then we're literally having the same reactions in the same conversation. And it's kind of like that is insanity. We're just sitting here letting this continue. And we're not trying to really get to the bottom of why is this happening? How is this happening? And is there anything that we can essentially do to kind of turn this around? I know we're not going to save every single person, but we can, especially after doing these autopsies that I've seen. There are a lot of cases where I find, man, that could have been prevented in a way. We could have done a little more at the very least.
Right.
Introducing FDTs, the only gourmet tea crafted with first responders and their families in mind. Proudly firefighter and veteran owned, our collection of gourmet organic teas is uniquely designed to honor those who are on the front lines to protect our communities. At FDTs, we believe in quality. That's why we source the freshest organic tea available, offering you the most popular flavors that not only excite your taste buds, but also bring comfort and relaxation to your daily life. Indulge in our specialty blends, classic Earl Grey, soothing chamomile, vibrant green tea with ginger root, decadent chocolate salty caramel black tea, and robust Irish breakfast. FDTs makes for a special and unique gift, perfect for any occasion or season. Taste the difference and show your appreciation for the rescuers in your life with FDTs, exclusively available on FDTs.com and in our Etsy store, Fire Department Prints.
Can you walk us through kind of a, say a generic case where, you use different methodologies and techniques, and maybe give us an example of how you're able to reconstruct somebody's mental state leading up to their death?
Okay. So there is, for example, if I have the case of, I'll just say an officer, I've reached out, most of the cases I've done, I've reached out to the family, and they are the ones that have wanted me to conduct the case. So I will contact one initial individual and start with them. And as I gather information, so I'm asking questions about anything from just kind of like you would with a mental status examination when you have the individual in front of you in any kind of like psychological setting. And you're kind of really just working back, trying to find out like their mental health history, a little bit about them and their upbringing and, just all that general information I try to gather about the individual, especially if I'm dealing with parents, significant others. And then when I'm dealing with a lot of the first responder coworkers, we're talking more of like, I guess, the work, how they were on the job, how they were with others, how they handled their duties, stuff like that. And as we talk, as I gather that very general information, there are pieces of info that come up that I tend to pick up on, I guess, from that psychological perspective, that I make note of that would be a risk factor in a sense for suicide. And so I start to take that info down and I explore and through the conversation, I may raise more questions given some of the info I've gathered, and I explore a little deeper into that. A lot of times people feel that, because it's because they're not trained, and I get it. They don't know that they're actually staring at something that is actually a risk for suicide, or is very relevant. So I will kind of zoom into that, and I will just ask a little further more. And then a lot of information tends to come out sometimes that is indicative of me needing to speak to someone else that now has been brought into the picture that knows a little more, or there's a specific part that needs to be further investigated. And then that brings out more information. So that's just kind of how that evolves.
Okay. So Liz, what are some of the challenges that you face? I imagine there are ethical issues, like maybe some information is shared, but you're concerned about other people finding out about that information. Like, how do you handle that?
So especially being, if you're a first responder, if you worked with first responders, you know that it can be tricky with confidentiality. We're kind of like high school kids all over again. Everybody likes to talk and kind of be in people's business. So for me, it was super important when I started to do these that I really sat down with family and coworkers and the individuals that I work with on a case and really explained to them how important it is that this information is kept, that I keep it confidential, and that I actually choose one individual to really reserve that confidentiality. When I'm done writing the report, there is only one individual out of everyone that I actually assign to be the individual that I will give my report to. And then that individual, say it's a parent or a significant other, that's typically what it is, unless they have maybe kids and they're grown. adults. It's usually one individual that I appoint to have the direct conversation of, here's the report. I do go over the report with each individual that I interview later, and I explain it and we talk about it, and we take that time individually. I do not give information in the report that says, person one said this, person two said that. It's not at all broken down that way. It's very general, and I don't share with if I'm interviewing Stacy, I don't let Bonnie know what I discussed with Stacy. That's just not necessary, and I feel that that's where that confidentiality should kind of stay. But I make it a point that the individual that I'm giving the report to, they decide who they may or may not want to share the report with, because I don't want to have the issues of, okay, there's all these reports floating around, or who they may want to sit with and actually let them look over. But otherwise, I verbally just discuss the report.
Now, since this is a clinician's masterclass, I have a question really directed at that. But if the deceased was working with a prescriber or a therapist or peer support, or they were part of some kind of a support network, does that get brought in, or do you ever have the ability to sit down with those people and ask questions?
So if the situation arises where the family may want me to, or the significant other may want me to, and the individual wants to speak, that's fine, but it's really not even necessary, because I don't necessarily need all of the psychological notes or any of that. Most of that is confidential anyway. Most of our EAPs should be having that confidentiality in place, and all that peer support. So it's really not necessary. The amount of information is so telling, and it's really there to begin with. I will share this. When we have suicides, especially even as a police officer on the job or as a fireman, when we go to these calls, we arrive, we don't know anything about these individuals, right? We don't know the people, we don't know the individual. We're just responding to a call. But when we get there and we initially have that conversation with loved ones or friends, and we ask, so, did you notice anything? Because that's the first thing we ask. Did you notice anything? Did you pay attention? Was there anything that stood out? 9 times out of 10, you'll have people say, no, John was fine. I mean, we just had dinner the other night and he was laughing and we were having a good time. And I just spoke to him yesterday and we never saw this coming. And so realistically, there are those signs, there are those risk factors, there are those symptoms, there are things that are there staring us in the face. But unfortunately, if we're just not trained to pick up on them, we don't see them. And that's fine. That's not to put blame on anyone. And I explain that to a lot of family and friends when we go over the report. How would you know, right? There are things that no matter what in life, we're not trained to identify. We're not trained to work with. We're not skilled at it. So how would we know? I mean, if a pipe broke in this room, if it burst, I'm not a plumber. I have no experience in plumbing. I will just call that guy and be like, get over here. The water's everywhere. So the same thing can be said about the suicide. It isn't until I start asking specific, direct questions regarding the signs, symptoms, and risk factors that I'm well versed with, do people now start to be like, oh, well, now that you mentioned it, I do recall, and then stuff starts to come out. And that's where I start to see a lot of behaviors, a lot of the risk factors, a lot of stuff that's very indicative of where the individual's mental mindset was at the time and why things played out the way they did. I see a lot of information regarding medications, drug use, alcohol use that, mixed together create all kinds of suicidal ideation. And people aren't even aware of that, which is something, I talk about a lot with individuals and trying to provide that knowledge so that we are able to provide better care for ourselves, because sometimes we just don't know. We don't know what we're getting into.
Just to piggyback on what you're talking about, Liz, are there ways that you can use these findings from these autopsies to contribute to suicide prevention strategies?
So, yeah, as I've continued to do these and through my work, I started to realize that, I think the the underlying issue that we have is we just don't have enough knowledge, right, on suicide, period. And we don't have enough knowledge on how to properly identify the issues that we're having issues with ourselves and what to do about it, right? Because first of all, in our line of work, we're a very stubborn and very difficult breed at times. It's hard for us to ask for help. We are the individuals that everyone runs to. We have the answers. We're in control. So when we're not in that space, it's so unfamiliar to us. We don't really know how to handle that. And when we sit here, even though we can lie to everyone because we're really good at it, at lying and, acting like we're good, everyone's good. And really deep down inside, we're not. We may not know what's going on with us, but we know that something's off. And so I feel that, having conducted these autopsies and having worked on the job for over 20 years, one of the biggest things that's missing is having people really explain what is the issue here. How can we go about being more proactive and not waiting till we get into the point of crisis. And then now it's just that much harder to come out of, and we just continue to spiral. And now we end up at the point where we feel there's no other way but to just stop this pain and all that we're experiencing by just taking our lives.
My dad would go on binges, so he would be gone for 24 to 48 hours at a time.
I was at a complete loss, did not know what I was going to do.
He would disappear and we couldn't get a hold of him. It was just very traumatizing.
These are human problems. Before you were a cop, you were a son, a brother, a sister, a mother, a child.
If you get mad about the nights and the weekends, you go back to, well, you should have known what you're getting into.
Why aren't we willing to step forward? Not just go through the motions, but actually apply those things that we're being talked to about.
If someone comes home and you can they've got that 1,000-yard stare, at least say, I see you're frustrated, or I see you're devastated, I see you're sad, I see you look stressed out. You want to talk about it?
So with that said, I created a curriculum that is really two things. Not only from a psychoeducation perspective, really trying to provide the educational components, it's also how, as a first responder who has sat in that seat as a trainee and is literally showing up saying, oh my goodness, what time is lunch? And what time are you cutting us out of here, right? Because if you're a first responder, that's what we're thinking, because it's just mandated training, and it's just something that's not really interesting. Even though sometimes we have great information being presented to us, sometimes it's just not presented in the way that would be relatable for us. So that was really important for me in putting together something that not only would give that knowledge to fill those gaps that we have with first responders, but also present it in a way that really makes sense to us, that is actually relatable. We can walk away with understanding more and actually providing self-care for ourselves and making it actually interesting and very realistic that we can understand. So it's not just getting up in front and just lecturing a PowerPoint, but really explaining, giving the information in a way that's very interactive. So that's how I go about doing that training. So it's a conversation. It's not me here to talk at anybody. It's a conversation piece about all this, right? Giving them the facts, but at the same time hearing back from them what their experiences have been and how that can be related. We also do a little bit of scenario-based training. I give them this kind of hypothetical couple situations, which we do that. We do that in training as first responders. Think back to the academy. They gave us scenario-based stuff. They gave us firearms, hands-on stuff, and the classroom setting stuff. And you have to be able to talk to these guys and gals in a way that, we have this is part of our culture. There's a way that we speak to each other. There's a way that we're able to really just kind of bounce information back and forth amongst each other. So I think that was really important in putting this together, and it's been very successful, and people tend to walk away, having a lot of, wow, I never really thought of it from that perspective, and just kind of like, wow, I'm more stunned by the information that again, you think, oh, common sense, we know this, we know that. No, there's a lot of information that's lacking, and it's pretty unfortunate because we need to have more training, more information about our self-care, not just how to do the job. It's how do you do the job, but what do we do when the job catches up with us? Because I'm going to tell you now, I don't care who stands in front of me, I will fight this to the end. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this job, one way or another, one call, many years of, it's going to catch up with you. One way or another. It could be early in your career, midway, or in retirement. And I see it over and over again. And the lack of self-care is so great. And this is part of the big problem. And so it's like, if we can just kind of start having this conversation, although it's tough, we have to do it, because what we've been doing is not working.
Could you speak to two fears that we see a lot in law enforcement in dealing with the topic of suicide? One is the fear of, if I disclose these feelings to someone, I will lose my weapon. And the second is, because I'm a first responder, I've put people into protective custody. I've seen them go into the psych ward. I don't want to become that patient because I know exactly what happens when I take them to the hospital and where they go and for how long. How do we work with those two fears?
So that's a great question. There's a lot of individuals that there's the fear, first of all, of just discussing suicide. I mean, I'm telling you, you want to walk into a room and silence a group of first responders, just say the word, okay, suicide. And they're just like, oh, because it's uncomfortable. They don't know enough about it, right? Isn't it interesting how as human beings, we're not comfortable with the unknown, right? So I think the biggest thing that people need to understand is that you don't just wake up. There's myths out there, right? And you don't just wake up and life is perfect and great and you're 100% just great in life. And you just woke up and decide, kind of like a mood, I want to kill myself. It doesn't work that way. Okay. There's with the suicides, this is something that's been a long time coming. There are a lot of risk factors. There's a lot of stuff that's going on. People contemplate, back and forth for long periods of time. So I think what's more important is for us to understand, those risk factors, discussing those risk factors, how interpersonal relationships, how mental health, right? And I'm not saying you have to have a mental health diagnosis, right, of a disorder, because that's another myth. People feel like you have to have a mental health disorder, and that's not true. So just, your physical health, sleep deprivation, brain injuries, psychotropic meds, whether you're on them or not, and if they're being managed. I mean, huge piece that I have found that's a big issue nowadays. All of these things need to be talked about so that people understand, like, hey, if we don't have these things, taken care of, or we don't deal with them, the risk becomes higher for you to go into crisis. It is then when you go into crisis and things get just worse because you haven't dealt with them, or you're adding more fuel to this fire, okay, that you will then find yourself going in that direction of possibly needing to go into a psych locked facility where you need to, because things have gotten that bad. So we need to have people understand that if we deal with and we take care of the things that are underlying and begin with, we won't have to get to that point. Yes, are there cases sometimes where we have individuals that have to go, they are suicidal. And so again, the sanctity of life is the most important thing, whether you're a first responder or not, right? And if you are a first responder, how could you be any good to others in the public if we're in this mental state where we have to do what we have to do sometimes to really take care of and get you back to a place of, not being a risk to yourself and others, right? With that said, it doesn't really happen as often, though, as people think, that you're getting to that point if you're dealing with it early on. So a lot of people don't have to necessarily always end up going straight, oh my gosh, this person's suicidal, we're going to the psych ward. Like, a lot of times people are not necessarily suicidal. They just have a lot going on. They have no care in place There's no therapeutic modalities in place whatsoever. And we just kind of need to stabilize the person a little, but not necessarily to the point where, oh my gosh, we're at this extreme where we have to take the psych ward. So that's why it is important to really educate a lot of the first responders and knowing like, hey guys, learn to advocate for yourself and really learn to understand that it doesn't have to get to that point. It doesn't mean, oh my gosh, you're going to get there. Don't be afraid of that. Let's start with the small things, and you'll probably never really see that extreme where you have to go, into a locked facility. So we shouldn't be afraid. We should just have the knowledge and learn to be able to have the resources. Okay, what's available?
Calling all mental health professionals, join us for the Clinician Masterclass Series, working with first responders, and empower your practice with expert insights and actionable strategies, brought to you by the Responder Resilience Podcast. This isn't your typical podcast. Dive deep on working with EMS and 911 personnel with seasoned therapist Dr. Nicole Navega and Bonnie Rumely. Sonny Provetto shares specific knowledge and tools to support police. Dr. Stacy Raymond offers professional insights on working with veterans. Dr. Robbie Adler-Tapia covers working with firefighters in a clinical setting. And Dr. Kristen Weldon explores cultural competency and the fire service. Get ready to transform your practice. Subscribe and stream anytime on our channels: YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stay in the loop and sign up now at respondertv.com.
One of the things in the psychoeducation that I really offer to a lot of the first responders is really starting to have them understand what's available out there. Do you guys know what EMDR is? Do you know psychotherapy is not the end all be all, right? I like to really explain to them how there's so many different therapeutic approaches out there. There's so many treatments. And one size does not fit all. It doesn't work that way. One of the examples I give is when you go to an ER and you have a broken bone, we'll just stick to the United States for the most part. Any hospital you go to, it's going to be the same, procedure for the most part. We're going to get you some kind of imaging done. They'll look at that, and then there's a treatment plan based on what we find, right?
Yep.
Psychology isn't that cookie cutter, fit for every single person. It depends. Person to person, it varies. What works for you may not work for the other person. So it's not just psychotherapy. Are we familiar with the EMDR? Are we familiar with any other kind of practices nowadays? I mean, we have cold water plunges, hyperbaric chambers. I mean, I can go on, and people just look at you like, wait, what? What did you say? What was that? And it's like, let's start looking into what's available and get you connected with those professionals that really can help you, and not get to the point where suffering on your own, ignoring, just kind of putting that away and rolling it under the rug continues to make it worse.
Yeah. So maybe we can segue over to Resilient Heroes. Can you tell us about your nonprofit?
Okay. So I started Resilient Heroes. It is a not-for-profit because I found that a lot of agencies need the support where it's not always a financial easy strategy for them to be able to have this type of psychoeducation presented. There are times where, budget, and I understand this for different cities, suburbs, or, different municipalities, the immediate training mandated stuff is necessary, right? You have to have your firearms training. You have to go through that specific training as a fireman and a paramedic, right? We can't go without this. And so, you have to fund that. And in the end, you may not have sufficient funds left for any more training that would be something like this, where it's really self-care providing for your employees. And so I felt that, if that's the issue, then we need to find a way to get this to the agencies for their members. So if we really are concerned with suicide, if we really are concerned with giving our first responders the tools that they need for self-care, just as much as we give them the tools that they need and the training they need to be able to carry out their duties, then why not put something together like this where we won't have to ask for any funding from the agencies, and yet we'll be able to still give those first responders what they truly need. So that was the need for starting the not-for-profit. And so with the, through grants and support through donations and through the public and other organizations, this is how I'm trying to get this to different agencies, so that I don't want to hear that funding is an issue anymore. My goal, my concern is, how do we have one less suicide? I don't want to hear all that, I guess, political, funding, bureaucratic. I don't want to hear any of that. It's like, how do we fix this problem, or, attempt to reduce it? That's my only concern. So that was the need to start Resilient Heroes.
Well, we commend you for that, because the three of us are involved in an organization doing similar work called the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team in Connecticut. And we go and give education on trauma, PTSI, EMDR. We talk about suicidality as well in there. And we do debriefings, the education, and we offer referrals to team members. So we commend you. We love these kinds of grassroots efforts because they do make a difference. And you never know the ripple effect and how many people you are actually saving in the end by doing your work.
Thank you so much. And thanks to you guys for your organization and all of your hard work. Really appreciate you.
Liz, as we wrap up, is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to speak to in terms of training or suicide autopsies or, psychological autopsies, or any other topic?
The only thing I would like to touch on is just on the clinician side. And so I really just would like to say a huge thank you to all those clinicians out there that are really working, trying to focus on first responder mental health and overall any kind of psychological support. We really need it. It's something that we feel like, as we're always responding to others and trying to help, we do need the help as well. So I think that's it's amazing to see that there's so many clinicians out there willing to specifically work with our population. And so one of the other things that I did want to discuss was how important it is, though, as a clinician who wants to work with this population, to really just kind of be aware of some of our concerns, in that we are a little different when it comes to our work and the duties that we are held to, that are a little different than the general population. So understanding whether or not our agency, has to know whether or not confidentiality is, something that can or cannot be upheld, is important to keep that line of communication open with the client. There is a lot of cultural components that really play a role when it comes to working with first responders. The level, trust. It's something that's very difficult, for us to, just right off the bat give. So just understanding and knowing that, there is a way that we approach this. It is difficult, first and foremost, to ask for help, to finally give into the help, and so you kind of get that one chance to kind of, really make it successful with that first responder, especially on that first visit. So I just think it's important to really be culturally aware of, what it is, how we speak, not be so offended maybe by it. And because we do, if you can make a first responder laugh, you're gold. Right there, first and foremost, in a first visit, that's a great way of building rapport. And overall, just really understanding our concerns, for some of us, a lot of, whether or not we are able to seek therapy. For the most part nowadays, I would say that in the US, just simple psychotherapy, as long as you're not, a threat to yourself or others, there shouldn't be an issue. But always just, be aware of what it is that the agency expects, what their rules and regulations are, so that you're on the same page. And really just being aware of the culture and how we tend to relate to each other, and how, trauma, for instance. I know a lot of individuals are trauma informed or want to work with trauma, but it isn't for everyone. I will tell you this. It is very tough. Some of the things that you're going to hear as a clinician, there that, people are telling you that you feel like, wow, some of this information a writer couldn't put together for a movie. It's so disturbing and so outrageous and out of this world. And so I think those are some of the examples of what I feel clinicians need to be well versed with and aware of, because, for both sides, it's going to be a disservice if those things aren't taken into account.
Well, so well said. And thank you for sharing all of that. Liz, where can people find you and Resilient Heroes and any other projects you're working on?
We are on our website is up, www.resilient-heroes.com. I am on LinkedIn. I am on Facebook. And yeah, there's a lot of the psychoeducation training. I do also go out and give trainings for clinicians. I've spoken at a conference through a university. We're really just trying to work with, like I said, we're so grateful for these clinicians that are coming out wanting to work with our population, but it's important to get it right, especially when you're dealing with this population, so that it is effective and we can continue to build.
Fantastic. Bonnie, any final thoughts?
It was a heavy topic today. We know that, but we appreciate your willingness to do all of the work that you do and to talk so openly with us. I was really intrigued to learn about this today, and I feel like I have a much better handle on it. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And I commend you for taking what you learned from the psychological autopsies and then educating police officers, so that they can be aware of what to look for in themselves and in their colleagues.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having this conversation and diving into this topic, which it is such a big part of the profession, yet really not talked about very much. So thank you for shedding light on it today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys so much and all the work you do. Thank you.
Remember, like and subscribe YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV. We're on LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Till the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself. Take care.